Good afternoon. Welcome to the Lessons of Vietnam show. Here on the show, we try to tell the real story of the Vietnam veteran and get rid of the myths and dispel the half-truths and misunderstandings and sometimes downright outright lies. I hope you're having a great day, like beautiful day like it is here. We are brought to you, as you if you tuned in, you already know this part, but brought to you on the second Monday of each month at 3 p.m. Eastern Time by Nissan Communications. And to get a chance to tune in to some of Nissan Communications' other shows, I think you'd enjoy some of them. To see the archive shows that we've done in the past, or you may have watched one and you want to go back and see it, you can go back into www.nissancommunications.com and select on demand and select the show from the LOV list. I am your host, Bill Dixon. I was in Vietnam 1967 to 68. I was with the headquarters company 159 Engineer Group, one at the Engineer Brigade at Long Binh Post. And I've been back 3 times over there. It's a beautiful country to visit now. They don't shoot you and so forth. You don't have to get out in the leeches. We value your comments and suggestions in the show. So if you have a suggestion or comment, please send me an email at dixonbill80@yahoo.com and give me an update of what you liked about the show, didn't like about the show, what you'd like to see, and even better, if you'd like to be a guest. Now, during the show, if you have any comments that you'd like to make during the show, just call 919-518-9773, or even better, go into Skype and go to Computers 2K Voice. Either way, it's a good way to communicate with us during the show. Also, very important out there, the Veterans Crisis Line. As it says here, Veterans Crisis Line connects veterans in crisis and their families and friends with qualified caring Department of Veterans Affairs responders through a confidential toll-free hotline, online, chat, or text. Now, the number is 1-800-273-8255, and be sure to press 1. That gets you through to the veterans part. Online, you can send a text message to 838255. And listen, there's no harm whatsoever in reaching out. I know I thought it for a long, long time. And I finally some of my friends just kind of forced me. And I go to the vet center on a regular basis. And I tell you what, if you're out there and you're wondering, reach out and help. There's somebody out there looking for you. Today's show is kind of a continuation of a show we already started. In fact, I think this is the 5th or 6th installment of it. We talk about the Vietnam War. We always think about the comets we're fighting and shooting and all that sort of stuff. But there's a lot more to it. War by its very nature is an extremely dangerous event. The risk of losing life or limb using a large assortment of weapons being deployed. That's anything from big guns, to airplanes, to individual rifles, machine guns, grenades, everything you can think of. And of course, in Vietnam, all their booby traps and so forth. In the American War in Vietnam, non-combat risks to the deployed troops covered a wide variety of traffic fatalities, drownings, murder, job-related accidents such as engineering, medical supply murder. I got murder in there twice. Drugs and alcohol. Yes, people were murdered over there. Drownings, chemical problems, biological elements, infectious diseases, animals, snake bites, heat exposure or exposure to extreme weather, exposure, food poisoning, and a large array of things, including stress and psychological effects of all the maladies even ever present. And that's a lot of stuff. And if you remember from the last show, we started out with, we had been talking about the whole show about rats problems over there. There were. And the note right there, it says, in the Vietnam War, infectious diseases took its toll on the deployed American forces. You can see the cartoon there. Today's duty roster for 1,800 hours is 24 hours. This first platoon has the enlisted latrine, second platoon, South Bunker, third has the barracks, and fourth, the mess hall. All reserves, freelancers scatter and create some real misery and depression. And that's kind of like soldiers going to always right. That's a nice picture of that right there, that rat getting ready to bite. And this is the problem you had, friendly fire. You wake up at night, there might be a rat chewing on your toe or something. You weren't real careful, and people did wake up and try to grab a gun sometimes and hope they didn't use it because it could shot their toe off, or either their bunkmate, if they had a bunkmate in there. So, right on. Now, through the show, I have got a lot of different people's comments and so forth in, and what I have done was I changed color pages. So if you see a different color, it's somebody else said it from the one that we started out with. This one is Sky Palace by Stephen Craig Gillis. And I thought you'd really appreciate this one. The Sky Palace and the Rat Patrol. Ask anybody who served in Vietnam about rats, and they'll tell you about the size and ferociousness of the little blankety-blank prairie rodents. Rats were difficult at best to control and almost impossible to eradicate. One of the keys to successful rat control was keeping your area policed and trash removed. Even with the high state of police, poison and traps out, you still had some NVA BC rats slipping through into your area, especially during the wet monsoon periods with their low-lying areas filled with rain. Such was our little area of the Vietnam arena. I was a member of a division aviation group S3 section in northern I Corps, which was the northern part of South Vietnam, our Republic of Vietnam. Our section operated the Group Tactical Operations Center, TOC, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Out of the TOC, we directed and coordinated the majority of the division's aviation missions, such as gunship escort for medevacs missions, combat assaults, routine logistical flights, ash and trash missions, perimeter patrols, and so forth. Normally, no job was too small or too big, but the rat patrol was a different matter. In the middle of the headquarters area next to the TOC, the commander, a colonel, who decided to build his second hooch, the original not being large or impressive enough. Most sixes are like that. With his second hooch, the good colonel decided to incorporate his office, living quarters, group executive office, command sergeant major, and clerk's office into a single long building. Of course, rank has its privileges, and the good colonel was certainly no exception. While the rest of the unit lived in tents and later in plywood hooches with canvas roofs, had burnout latrines and such, the colonel lived and worked in air-conditioned, insulated quarters and office complete with running water and flush toilets. Well, that was a biggie there. Okay. Given the conditions we lived under, the colonel's hooch could only be described as somewhat opulent. Some of the more printable names of the troops given it was Super Hooch, the Hilton, or Sky Palace. I can imagine what some of the others were. But by living where he did, close to the TOC, Colonel X felt close to the action and pulse of his unit. Colonel had the comm section remote of all the TOC radios in his office so he could monitor the radio traffic and had a direct field phone hotline installed between his office and the TOC. At the least little sign of some radio action in the area, he would call over on the landline or remote phone and yell, sit rep, situation report. Give me a sit rep. I guess after 30 years, it can come out. After a few days of this, certain members of the S3, who shall remain nameless, quickly learned to disconnect the remote units when the manure began to hit the rotary oscillator. To keep the good colonel out of our hair until we developed the situation and had enough information to accurately brief him or give him a sit rep. I hope that the above sets the tone of the working environment under the colonel. As the wet monsoons arrived, we began to have rat problems with them moving to higher ground. We being on the higher ground. One night about 0200 hours, the TOC duty officer answered the hotline, and in trying to keep a straight face, kept saying, yes, sir, right away, sir. When I asked what that was all about, the duty officer burst out laughing and said, the colonel says he heard some rats in his hooch and for one of the troops to come over and check the area. Since I was the only troop in the TOC besides the switchboard operator, I was elected. As I started to leave, the duty officer, who was laughing so hard he almost fell out of his chair, said, "Oh, Sarge," he said, "to bring a weapon too." Since SOP, Standard Operating Procedure, called for the night crew to have their individual weapon and equipment in the TOC, this was no problem. Picking up my trusty M16 and flashlight, out the door I went to the Sky Palace, the Rat Patrol. So did not want to shoot to get shot as a VC sapper. I knocked loudly on the colonel's office door. No answer. So I knocked again. No answer. Making as much noise as I could, I let myself into the office and was hit with the coldest blast of air I had felt since leaving Conus, which is continental United States, by the way. The air condition was set so cold you could hang meat. When I knocked on the colonel's quarters door, I did get an acknowledgement. The room was dark, and I had no idea where the light switch was. By my flashlight beam, I saw the colonel in his bunk with the mosquito net tucked in all around the bunk. My fear of possibly being accidentally shot was well-founded because the colonel had his .38 pistol in his hand. He said, "Sergeant, I heard them in here, so I checked the area out. So on my hands and knees, I crawled around his quarters and then through his office, M16 and flashlight poised to do battle with the ferocious NVA VC rats. After a thorough search and not seeing any evidence of rodent trespassing, I reported, apparently the rats have departed the area, sir. With this report, I got a 5-minute lecture on the habits and dangers of the Southeast Asia rat, and was dismissed. When I returned to the TOC, the duty officer was still laughing and asked, well, what happened? I replied that as high as the Sky Palace was off the ground and as cold as it was, no rat could survive there without supplemental oxygen and Arctic clothing. Then in my best NCO command voice, I rendered a standard infantry patrol report ending with, patrol element swept the area with negative results. With this, the duty officer started writing in the daily staff journal, 0200 hours. The colonel called reference rats in his hooch and requested rat elimination personnel. Armed rat patrol of departed TOC swept area with negative results. Rat patrol returned TOC, no casualties. When I questioned the duty officer on the wisdom of recording that in the daily staff journal, he said, it happens and now it's recorded. Later that morning, when the S3 came in and was going over the journal, I thought he was going to have a heart attack over the rat patrol entry. But since it was now part of the official journal, he let it ride. Thankful Colonel X never asked to see the daily staff journal from that night. You can see, kind of get an idea of just how the rat situation was. Okay, this was from wildlifeteam.com. The Vietnam War was horrifying for all people involved. Without clear lines, battle was confusing, difficult, and frustrating. To make matters worse, the enemy wasn't always a human. Soldiers on both sides faced a mutual hostile force that both sides would learn to fear. This new neutral enemy would be Mother Nature. The harsh environment, oppressive heat, mosquitoes, predators, diseases, and so forth led to the demoralization of all people involved in the conflict. Unexpectedly, one of Mother Nature's most feared and predators also joined the battle. On December 22nd, 1968, a man-eating tiger stalked an American team, part of the 3rd Marine Recon Battalion, performing a patrol near Quang Tri in Vietnam. The 6-man recon team was on observation mission near Fire Support Base Alpine, about 6 miles east of the Laotian border. The team had completed its assigned mission, was waiting to be helicoptered from the area. Bad weather conditions prevented their immediate extraction, and the team had posted a 2-man radio watch while the others settled down to sleep. The tiger attacked without making a single sound. Suddenly, in the covers of darkness, soldiers were alerted to a man screaming. PSC Roy Reagan, who had been sleeping next to the victim, recalled. I jumped up and saw the tiger with his mouth around my partner. All I think about was to get the tiger away from him. I jumped at the tiger and the cat jerked his head and jumped into the bomb crater, 10 meters away, still holding his prey. He jumped 10 meters into a hole with the man in his mouth. This is by Richard Klein. I heard of one Vietnamese soldier who was squatting in the bushes, taking care of his daily business, who was attacked by a tiger. That's the only secondhand story I ever heard. The moral of the story was not to shoot at tigers. A wounded tiger would not be able to hunt normally and would become a man-eater. People are easily gamed. We were told to take a buddy if you went to the bushes to crap. That way you're safe and you find out who your true friends are. Now, one by Steve Perkins, who was a Marine. I recall one incident involving Force Recon Marines. His team was taking a break in the bush. A tiger came out of the weeds and grabbed his left forearm. He punched the tiger in the nose with his right fist, and the tiger ran off. Well, that kind of gives you an idea that the tigers were out there looking away. Now, here's another problem we had. Terrifying Vietnam War Booby Traps by Blake Stillwell. Often marked by the Viet Cong using a broken bush, palm leaf, or certain element of stick, such as a rectangle or tripod. In other words, they left a mark so that other Viet Cong would come by, would see it, and know there was a booby trap of some kind close by so they wouldn't fall in it. The retreating Vietnamese would fasten traps from crude spikes, grenades, wires, and even memorabilia. And you can see the one there that's hinged. If you step down in, our boots had canvas sides. So if you step down in, the punji stick things there would go into your leg and ankle. They were all had fish hook barbs, so you couldn't just pull them out, which created a real problem. Sometimes it was better to injure the soldier than it was to kill the soldier. If the soldier was killed, the patrol could continue on without the killed soldier. But if you wounded him, the medic had to stay with him, and somebody probably had to stay with the medic and so forth. And would you go back to the other slide just a second, please? This was used to take down helicopters. How, you ask? Well, they just needed to hang it on a tree, and when a helicopter lowered itself close enough, the wind from the chopper propeller will spin the trap's propeller. If the helicopter is close enough, the grenade will hit the blades of the chopper propeller and explode. Never heard of that one before, but it looks like it worked pretty good. Okay, thank you, sir. The punji sticks. They dig a hole and put the punji sticks in. These are traps made with sharpened bamboo stakes, often smeared with urine, feces, or other substance that would cause infection to the victim. The VC would dig a hole and put the sticks in the bottom, then cover it with a thin frame. The victim would put his foot through the cover and fall on the spikes below. The more insidious trap featured spears pointed downward, so victims would be injured only when they tried to pull out of the trap. You step in something, first response is to jump back, and that's when they would get you. Snake pits. Yes, this is exactly what it sounds like. Viet Cong guerrillas would often carry bamboo pit vipers in their packs to hopefully kill anyone who searches through them. They would also tie the deadly snake to bamboo and hide them throughout their tunnel complex. When the bamboo was released, so was the snake, right onto the enemy. The snakes were nicknamed three-step snakes because 3 steps was all you could make before the venom kills you. U.S. tunnel rats had to be especially trained to navigate and disarm these traps. We always call them 2 steps, but the whole idea was if you put them in your pack, if you kill a VC or an enemy soldier, you want to go through his stuff and see what kind of papers he's got. That way you can find out a whole lot about his unit. So you can reach your hand into his pack to find out his paperwork and find that 2-step or 3-step snake. So Grenade in a can. Insert a grenade deep in the can. 2 cans were mounted on trees along either side of a path. The safety pins of the grenades are removed and explosions are put into cans. Explosives meaning the grenades, which hold down the striker levers. The tripwire was then tied to each grenade. When the wire was tripped, the grenades were pulled out of the can to detonate instantly. This could also be done with one can and a snake. If you're walking along the trail, you had to watch for that real thin fishing line across the trail. You had to look at things head high. You had to look for snipers in the trees. You had to look all over. I mean, you had to have your eyes going 360, 65 degrees all the time. Flag bombs. American soldiers love souvenirs. Plus, you could also sell them to the units in the back in the rear for souvenirs. The NVA and VC loved to fly flags, and they knew U.S. troops loved to capture enemy flags. So when they were forced to leave a base or location, they often rigged the flags with an explosion of some kind. So when U.S. troops started to take down the flag, it would set off the charge. In fact, any attempt to move the pole or flag set off the booby trap. This is similar to keepsake, lose hand trap, where the NVA would intentionally rig anything a U.S. troop would consider a war trophy with an explosion. The cartridge trap. You couldn't leave anything laying around. The cartridge trap, this trap is an awful one because it was very difficult to detect. A cartridge, a round of ammunition, would be set into a piece of bamboo and lowered into a shallow hole in the ground. At the bottom of bamboo was a board and a nail. The regular weight of someone walking on the cartridge would drive the nail into the primer, turning the nail into a firing pin and firing the bullet upward through the unsuspecting victim's foot. See how simple these things were, but they all worked. The bamboo whip, another sharpened bamboo trap. The whip consisted of spikes over a long bamboo pole. The pole was pulled back into an arc using a catch attached to a tripwire. When the wire is tripped, the catch gives out and sent the foot-long spikes into a trooper's chest at 100 miles an hour. You used to see those in a lot of Tarzan movies and so forth. The mace, another tripwire trap. The mace may have been the worst of all Vietnam War booby traps. Once the wire was triggered, a 24-inch metal or wooden ball with spikes welded into it weighing 40 pounds or more would swing down from the tree. And you can know what it would do when it came down to hit the tree. The tiger traps. The tiger trap was similar to the mace in that a tripwire would undo the catch on the rope. Only instead of a swinging ball, the death from above took the form of a man-sized plank weighted with bricks and full of barbed metal spikes quickly falling to earth on someone's forehead. You see a troop there, Richard, looking into a Vietnamese hooch to see if there's anybody in there or whatever, and if he trips that wire, that pole would come down. There was a wide range of various modifications of these traps used by the communists. As the Americans would adjust, the communists would modify their traps. Whatever, by the time we trained people, they would be changing. Okay, now this is the story I want you to take. I want you to sit back and think about what I'm going to read to you, and so forth. There was no really safe area in Vietnam. As a grunt in the boonies or a spy clerk in a large base environment or a unit in a remote fire base. But the grunt, the troop that took the battle to the enemy, MOS, 11B, or variations of that, 11 Bravo, or 11 Bullet Stop, infantry man, there was constant danger and stress from the enemy forces as well as the infectious diseases, the environment they lived and fought in daily made everyday life and its challenge. Let's participate in an experiment. All right, now this is what I need for you to help me out. You're in a hot, sticky jungle with no or little air moving. The roar of mosquitoes is almost deafening. You have been walking all day through the jungle. Wait a minute, vines tripping you all day. You have been carrying an 80-pound pack with straps digging into your shoulders, plus ammunition for the 60 caliber machine gun probably 5 or 6 canteens of water for yourself. The ever-present FU lizards, there were lizards over there that they would say, well, you can kind of get the idea. Lizards are sounding out their calls along with the birds, monkeys, and other nocturnal animals of the jungle. Okay, now you're getting out there, you're hot, you're sweaty, you're tired, you're frustrated. The sweat is running to your eyes, and the salt is burning those leech bites you got across when you cross the stream. Your feet are sore and shriveled in your boots from being wet all day. You're on the verge of exhaustion. You haven't had a real bed to sleep in or a full night's sleep since you arrived in country. Tonight will not be any different. You hope to have a decent package of sea rations, a place free of roots and rocks to lay down on. Thank God it's not monsoon season, because being wet and cold just adds to the misery. Now, with all this attacking your senses, close your eyes. Put yourself in there. Hot, tired, wet feet, sleepy grunt. Now it's time to add another element to your evening. You're setting up for an ambush, setting out claymores, getting your unit all on alert and nap time set. In other words, when you're going to be on guard. What are your responsibilities with your field of fire? You have quite to set up your field of fire before it gets dark. Don't let that canteen of water slosh and make a noise. Keeping your eyes closed. If you are there on an ambush, it's so dark that you cannot see your hands. All the sounds of the jungle are still going on. The mosquitoes are enjoying their smorgasbord. And you are waiting in pitch black dark for the enemy to come so you can kill them before they kill you. As you sit there with every fiber of your body on alert for a new sound, you get a cramp in your leg, but you can't move. You might make a noise that the enemy can hear and know where you are before you know where they are. Suddenly you hear a new sound and feel something slithering across your leg. Is it one of the 18 to 24-inch millipedes, or that cobra you saw sunning itself earlier, or the boa you saw hanging from a tree limb when you crossed the river? It's probably not that tiger from the footprints you saw earlier. Remember, it's total dark, no light, keeping your eyes closed. What are you thinking about right now? Bam! Somebody sets off one of the claymores. That's kind of what it was like, folks, to be out at night on ambush. Dark, dark. All the sounds of the jungle. But you're trying to pick out a different sound. The sound of another person coming down the trail. Quiet. Not making any noise. Maybe it's a smell. Maybe it's just the birds quit. But it's that time because you can't see. Okay. Moving along. Only in movies, war never stops, and enemies clash every day. In reality, most wars end after a couple of fights, and the rest of the time, soldiers are just sitting in their bases waiting for new commands. For example, during World War I, there were only 40 days of actual war in 4 years. Yep, it was brutal when it happened, but most of the time, the troops were just chilling in their trenches. However, the story of the Vietnam War is a little different. This war was so tense that the troops were fighting for 240 days in a year on average. No one was ever safe, and soldiers rarely had a chance to rest and have their private time to readjust. The Vietnam War was just too brutal and fast for any truce. So for the soldiers, the Vietnam War was much worse than World War II or any other war in American history. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of a day in the life. What was the climate like in the Vietnam War? The subtropical climate, terrain, and fauna of Vietnam also contributed to the stress of American soldiers. Uniformed GIs were almost always drenched with water or sweat due to the heat, humidity, monsoonal rains, and groundwater. Tropical climate zones exist in Vietnam. While temperature climate zones exist, With monsoons having an impact on all of the country, the rainy season is defined as the period between May and October when monsoon circulations bring heavy rainfall to the north and south, and from September to January when monsoon circulations bring heavy rainfalls to the central regions. So Vietnam has basically three different rainy seasons, depending on where you are. Tropical climate in Vietnam is dominated by monsoons, which are the most important seasons for the country. Vietnam's temperature usually ranges from 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 95 degrees during the year. Tropical monsoons are common in Vietnam, but its terrain is varied, which means the temperatures and seasons will vary from region to region. As a result of the extra rains, rivers were expected to flood, cutting off bridges and closing crossing points, as well as landslides. Military forces attempt to influence the weather for the first time. As a result, some saw it as a positive alternative to fighting and bombing. The Vietnam War did not have as much rain as any other time, but was just that a lot of American boys were complaining about it. In other words, we didn't have more rain than normal, but just because we were there. As well as Vietnam's subtropical climate, terrain, and fauna, American soldiers were also affected by the country's harsh weather. Uniformed GIs were almost always drenched with water or sweat due to the heat, humidity, and monsoons, rains, and groundwater. We've talked about that on the other slide. Tropical climate is present in Vietnam's south in monsoon dry season. Okay. Next one, please. All right. Vietnam's northern region is located in a tropical climate zone. Hanoi's mean temperature in January is 63 degrees Fahrenheit, 17 degrees Celsius, while its average temperature is 74 degrees Fahrenheit. You can see the difference there. The country's climate is quite diverse, with freezing temperatures and even snow in the northern highlands of North Vietnam, which backs it right up onto China, which are often depicted as a place with steamy jungles and hot beaches. There are two distinct monsoon seasons in Vietnam. The dry season in Vietnam is from November to April, while the wet season is from May to October in the south. And when we're talking about dry, we're talking about dry. Everything turns to powder. But during the rainy season, there ain't nothing dry. As a result of the heat, the mercury thermometer soared to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Hong Kong, a rural district in Ha Tinh province, has a temperature of 4 degrees Celsius. Located about 150 miles south of Hanoi in Vietnam's northern central coastal region, in May and October, the country was drenched by heavy rains for 6 months. That's good. It's hard to get things up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail or to live and fight. A precipitation period is in place. Vietnam received an average of 28 to 197 inches of rain per year, but most places receive between 55 to 94 inches. Most of the annual precipitation occurs during the rainy season, which accounts for 80% to 90% of the total rain. The rainy season in southern Vietnam runs from April to September, October, with June, July, and August being the rainiest month. However, here's the important thing to keep in mind. Rainy seasons don't always mean a constant rain or downpour. As you can see from the pictures there, during the rainy season, things kind of bog down. You can see the guys with the tank. You can see the guys sleeping out there under his poncho, trying to stay dry, or people trying to get the water out of their tents before it's great living conditions. Now, to make things worse, this is from the New York Times, July 2nd, and I forgot what year, I think it was 68. The United States has been secretly seeding clouds over North Vietnam, Laos, and South Vietnam to increase and control the rainfall for military purposes. Government sources, both civilian and military, said during an extensive series of interviews that the Air Force Cloudseeding program has been aimed most recently at hindering movement of North Vietnamese troops and equipment suppressing enemy anti-aircraft missile fire. The disclosure confirmed speculation in congressional and scientific circles about the use of weather modifications in Southeast Asia. Despite years of experiments with rainmaking in the United States and elsewhere, scientists are not sure they understand its long-term effect on the ecology of a region. Kind of like Agent Orange, huh? Beginning in 1967. I'm done. Slide. There you go. Beginning in 1967, State Department officials protested that the United States, by deliberately altering the natural rainfall in parts of Indochina, was making environmental risk of unknown proportion. But many advocates of the operation have found little wrong with using weather modifications as a military weapon. What's worse, one official said, dropping bombs or rain. All the officials interviewed said that the United States did not have the capacity, a capability to cause heavy floods during the summer in the northern parts of North Vietnam, where serious floods occurred last year. Officially, the White House and State Department declined comment on the use of meteorological warfare. This is one of those things where no one is going to say anything, one official said. Kind of typical. Most officials interviewed agreed that the seeding had accomplished one of its main objectives, muddying roads and flooding the lines of communication. But there were also military and government officials who expressed doubt that the project had caused any dramatic results. If any dramatic results, it would be against us. That's my opinion I threw in extra. The sources, without providing details, also said that a method had been developed for treating clouds with a chemical that eventually produced an acidic rainfall capable of fouling the operation of North Vietnamese radar, equipment used for direct surface-to-air missiles. I know it stayed right there in one spot. The intelligence agency expanded its cloud seeding activities to the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Splying Trail in Laos, sometimes in the middle of the 1960s. A number of government sources said by 1967 the Air Force had become involved, although, as one former government official said, the agency was calling all the shots. Always assumed the agency had a mandate from the White House to do it, he added. Several former CIA and high-ranking Johnson administration officials depicted the operations along with the trail as experimental. The art had not yet advanced to the point where it was possible to predict the results of the seeding operation with any degree of confidence, one government official said. We used to go out flying around looking for a certain cloud formation, the official said. In other words, what we're trying to say here is we don't know when we seed the cloud where that cloud is going to end up at. It may rain and cause problems in North Vietnam, but that cloud may go south. If I recall, I carried four canteens, LRPs. That was long-range reconnaissance for food, rations, for 47 days. 10 magazines, plus spare ammo, depending on which weapon I was carrying. A couple of frag grenades, poncho liner, Air Force survival knife, and salt pills. I remember humping up a particular hill one day on the last day of an operation beside a Republic of Vietnam Special Forces captain. His nickname was the Mountain Goat. I was out of water, ready to collapse at 19 and 20 years of age, looking over at this old man, about 35 years old, and seeing him up and in, emptying his canteen of water, grinning a silly grin he had. He had been doing it all of his life when he was accustomed to heat and humidity. Then came the monsoon season and bone-chilling wet nights. Headache. Hell, we hurt all over. Temperatures were generally around 100 degrees or so in the open areas where the sun could reach you. The humidity was always around 90% because of all the rice paddies around you. When you got into the jungle, the temperatures dropped into the high 80s, but the humidity shot up to over 100%. You're always drenched from either sweat or humidity, and your gear always chafed you someplace on your body. You stank all the time, like sweat. Your feet were always cracked and sore from all the wading through the water that you did. Everything over there was designed to kill you or make you extremely sick. That means plants, animals, and bugs. You could get drenched and completely soaked all over at 10 a.m. and by 11:30 you were bone dry. Nothing was ever as it should be. People who were friendly weren't. People who were supposed to be your allies could be enemy agents or would run at the first sight of combat. And everybody over there wanted the money of the rich Americans. The whole nation stank like rotting plant materials and feces all the time. It was a constant assault upon your body as wellness and nose. Because of the movies and newsreels, everybody thinks that Vietnam was all jungles and rice paddies. The jungle was mostly in the central highlands and the rice paddies were down south in the delta. My whole time there, I never saw a jungle and I never saw a rice paddy. Jeez. I was almost in the center of the country, northwest of Saigon, not far from the Cambodian border. The terrain there was rolling hills, heavily farmed. Would you believe they grew a lot of corn? It looked more like West Virginia than anything you'd expect to see in the tropics. As for dehydration, in those days, the Army believed strongly in salt tablets. They thought the worst harm from dehydration was caused by loss of salt, and they made us take a lot of it. Probably get them prosecuted for war crimes now. Nobody back then had ever heard of electrolytes. If we'd ever heard the word, we'd have thought it had something to do with kamahooch. A wet towel around your neck worked really well for me. Our main stomping grounds were the Iron Triangle, Hobo Woods, Michelin Rubber Plantation, that being 3 Corps. Sopping wet from perspiration from day one. Even my boots wet from perspiration. I sweat profusely. Yes, we were required to take salt pills. The NCOs were to make sure that lower graders took them, same as malaria pills. My worst problem was fungus infection in my groin. Miserable, wet all the time, never cleared up for more than a few days. Then it's back. Looked like a piece of raw beef. It hurt like hell. High humidity, of course. In monsoon seasons, got cold as hell too. Wet all the time. Chills. Guys actually got ill from exposure. Felt good to huddle under a DRV poncho liner. A dry poncho liner. Those poncho liners were at a premium, subject to go away if you didn't watch them. I was in the Central Highlands, Binh Dinh province between Quy Nhon and An Khê, later in Da Nang. This is by James Busman. You're carrying between 60 and 70 pounds of equipment. Through jungles, up and down hills, while the daytime temperature is 90, 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity is 88%. This is not a peaceful stroll through the park, as the environment will greatly hinder your progress, and other persons will be looking for you and trying to kill you. The amount of stress you experience is palpable. Use the old expression, you are sweating like a pig. Now, do you think that would make it worse for you or a soldier, irrespective of what or what they were doing? Once you become acclimated to the oppressive heat and humidity, you feel it less, but trust me, its cumulative effect never completely went away. Next soldier story. Sanger Ransford, Army Ranger, Army Infantry. It did for me. It was brutal. We humped all day long in the sun or climbed mountains with very heavy packs, helmets, full gear. We had one guy go down. Almost did after one really long, steep hike up a mountain. I was so miserable. I had a guy take a photo of me so that if a recruiter got me, I would get it out and remember. In it, my uniform is a dark green, except for one spot placed on a rolled-up sleeve at my elbow. A light spot about the size of a quarter was there. The sweat hadn't gotten through that yet. The first thing you did was toss your underwear. I had maybe 5 showers in 9 months. Once took a bar of soap and stood in the monsoon. Once at a fire base, stripped went down to the shower. By the time I got back, I was as if I'd never gone. But he was sweaty all over again. Okay. Mr. Charles Neeson. 7 to 10 days and 90 degrees. 90% humidity. No shower, not enough toilet paper. 60-pound pack with your stuff and a box of M60 ammunition. I remember praying that it would rain. What did American soldiers eat while on patrol? Early on, we had sea rations. They were canned for career, but weren't that bad. The downside was that they were heavy. Humping jungle, you would always carry one meal, preferably two. They would come out with the ammunition. If you hadn't been shooting and didn't need ammunition resupply, the seas might be a day late. About 1970, we've got dehydrated rations, or LRP rations, named for the long-range reconnaissance patrol, which they were designed. They were a nice try, barely. You can't reconstitute dehydrated beans. LRP, long-range reconnaissance patrols, involved in MREs, meals ready to eat, to later for us. They came along later. But you could always tell the sea rations were old. Sometimes the cigarettes inside would have mold on them. Eric Mann says, how much sleep did American soldiers get per night during the Vietnam War? Sleep per night? I was awake for 22 months. Well, it seemed that way. It depends on where you were stationed in your job. Many had 8 to 5 jobs, but others were on constant call. Most, if my time was spent out in the bush, you had guard duty every night for 2 or 3 hours or so. Some nights you had listening post duty for ambush and didn't get any sleep. You basically slept whenever and wherever you could. James McKinnon. Was the Vietnam War really that terrifying for soldiers? I remember my teacher telling us the war was so bad it was common for soldiers to start doing drugs and committing suicide. Originally answered, was the Vietnam War really that terrifying for soldiers? For some, it was. For others, it wasn't. Both sides suffered during the Vietnam War. For U.S. troops in Vietnam, it could be an extremely terrifying image. This you're trudging through a jungle, thick with underbrush and foliage. Every step you take could be your last. You could be killed by a sniper that you can't even see. You could be impaled by bamboo sticks covered with chili peppers and feces, causing infections that would cause serious damage. You could step on a tripwire and unknowingly kill both yourself and many of your friends. How do U.S. soldiers deal with the heat of Vietnam? Bill Brandon says, some parts of Vietnam are not as hot as others. I was stationed 40 miles northeast of Saigon in Cu Chi area. It was hot there all 12 months. The farther north you went, the seasons changed considerably. In the mountains, nights can be downright cold. And as the seasons change, the temperature up more north get colder during the day and especially at night. Acclimation is how you deal with the temperatures. Kenshaw says, I was a Navy riverboat captain and Navy diver in Vietnam. That's a great question. Everyone dealt with it differently, if at all, depending on where one was from and how acclimated they had become back home. The heat and stifling humidity was all encompassing. Growing up in Miami, I had no problem with these factors. I was hot, I sweated, I drank lots of water and dealt with it. Like I had every summer in my life back in South Florida. We did, however, have guys that could not deal with the heat and humidity of the jungle and rivers very well. They became tired all the time and lethargic. They lost their energy and had problems breathing. I forced my men on particular boats to drink water constantly to keep their bodies hydrated as much as possible. We designed shirts made from towels so that our body sweat would be soaked up by the terry materials. Our flak jackets were plastic lined so they would increase body heat, and that was excuse enough for some men to shun them entirely. But amidst all the discomfort, when it came time to act, the men acted and reacted as they should, as they were trained to do. No matter what the level of discomfort was, there was always the option of taking a quick dive into the river to cool off and lower one's body temperature. A few cases of heat prostration did occur, but it was not the norm. It was discomfort that bothered most. Yeah, you got to be careful when you jump in that water, though, because you may end up jumping into water snakes. Donna M. Davis, Prusik, uh, wife of a veteran. I love that when you get in. It might be the first of many understatements. Welcome to South Vietnam. As you deplane, you will notice a slight increase in temperature and humidity. Yeah. Listen to my husband's stories reveal that the first real challenge you had was when you exited the plane after being flown over from the USA. He said almost everyone immediately turned their head and vomited due to the smell accentuated by the oppressive heat. The easiest way to answer this would be that you just eventually learn to live with sweat and a lot of other people who sweat. You learn coping medicine and help each other in any way possible. And Davis puts this is the same lady. Then there were days when there was no dead pigs coming down the river. You had to be careful where you got your water. And when the river was better than usual, you could always leap in and cool down a little. But the Mekong River is not well known for its clarity or purity. It took some days for the men's system to become acclimated to Vietnam food also. He told me there were many times you could actually smell the difference in each nationality's sweat. The Vietnamese ate fish, so their perspiration smelled quite different than other soldiers who were mostly used to eating a wider variety of meats. Unfortunately, this also applies to the Vietnamese cattle. If you mistakenly got around the cattle, they used to work the fields. It was very likely that you might get attacked by them because you smell more like the regular predators who also ate meat, tigers. You didn't have the good fish smell. London, whatever, I can't pronounce it there, but that's close. We get no acclimation. We get no acclimation. I got to Cam Ranh Bay one morning by dark that night. I was pulling guard on the perimeter at Dong Ha in the middle of a rice paddy. I got there in April, so the weather was still rather pleasant. Since I was from South Louisiana and had just finished a training at Fort Benning, Georgia, I was not terribly affected, but the Northerners among us were suffering. We had no air conditioners or fans and slept under mosquito nets, which further restricted the movement of air. Towards the end of my tour, my parents sent me a box fan, but I was so seldom at base, I rarely got to use it. Contrary to what modern wisdom states, it is possible to survive such conditions with little wear if one takes salt and water and claims every piece of shade available. Mike Murphy. Lots of water and salt pills, wet towels around the neck, and just putting up what could not be changed. War is never comfortable in the battle area. Generals in the rear had air conditioning and sirloin steaks, but not the sea ration eating grunt in the bush. If you came to a stream, it had to be checked out by the corpsman or medic for bacteria or leeches before you could drink it or bathe in it. They had water purification tablets, but the water then tasted like shit. And I'll have to tell you my water story later. Steve Perkins says, we had no choice. Drank lots of water. Made a sunshade out of OD towels to protect the back of our necks. Sometimes soaked with water if it was plentiful. Also took issue with salt tablets. I carried 6 canteens. Sometimes I still ran out of water on extended patrols and operations. Okay. Richard Stahl says, we fairly quickly got used to the climate. The weather that bothered us most was the damp cold of the monsoon season. One of the main things Vietnam taught me is that you can get used to just about anything if you have it to do. You see in the picture there, pre-wash, monsoon starting. You see the rinse, the soak, and the steam dry once the monsoons go by. James Hoover. I spent a lot of time in the tropics, and you Really must pay close attention to your body and the signals it's sending you, and make sure you rest and drink sufficiently fluids. Rest and drink. That's soldiers in the field, especially on patrol, aren't always in position to do any of that, and their water supply is usually very limited, especially for humid tropical conditions. If you've never been in a jungle in Southeast Asia, you just have no idea. If you're a typical American or European ancestry, you're sweat buckets. Even standing still in the shade, it just keeps coming. You do eventually acclimate, and this is probably why a lot of U.S. soldiers who went to Vietnam were sent to do their basics in infantry training in the South or Hawaii, where it's often very hot and humid. At least this way, they wouldn't be straight out of the freezer going to the fire, and they very likely acclimate faster. Even so, many guys would not have been fully acclimated until they had been in country at least 3 months. It sort of takes you that long just to adjust to a new environment. After that, it gets easier, but probably not by much. When you're laden down with gear and waist deep in muck, not quite sure where you are, and trying to avoid being ambushed if your heat is getting to you, stress, even physical or mental, won't help you one bit. I suspect that most of the heat stroke cases would have been caused by individual genetics and pre-existing health problems that weren't detected in screening, and by new guys who weren't acclimated, who had to learn how to protect themselves. I also suspect it depends on the situation. My dad was an Air Force medic and later anesthetist just prior to Vietnam, and he said they had a lot of heat stroke cases when he was stationed in Texas and North Carolina, mostly when men undergoing training were put up under sudden intense stress during the forced marches and so forth. Those marches where they're awake, where they'd wake you up in the middle of the night and make you march, walk, and run until everyone was on their knees. Historically, too, this is when heat strokes casualties tend to spike. It's less common now because the military has developed quite a lot of time to studying practical ways to prevent heat strokes and keeping troops hydrated. Damon Mazur says, I recall nights that as we slogged through jungles and hills, mountains, filled up our holes, some sea rats, and moving out at dawn and stopping as Marines dropped from heat. Candidly, at the time, I didn't spend much time analyzing. Great opportunity to sit, slug into the vegetation, get some shut-eye. I'm not a big water drinker. Never was, but always up for coffee. Of course, that meant a used fruit can, heat tab, and the coffee from the sea rats. And try as I might, 2 to 3 cups of coffee was the best I could get. Never had heat issues, and I've spent a lot of time in jungles and deserts. It's possible that majority of heat drops were FNGs, funny new guys, not acclimated. I'm sure that every now and then one about or two trying to get out of the field, but to be on the fresh meat side also. Problem was that we didn't medevac with heat cases for most part. Bunched them up with the doc and little security and didn't need to be Sherlock for them to move on and catch up. We, our fearless leaders, but can't say bad thinking, were a bit semi-fanatical about tripping off NVA our exact position. Many juniors, probably early of 68, word got passed that we company were responsible for our own water, meaning no helos bringing water or anything. And if you're humping for 3 to 4 days without intention on assaulting hill position, don't hold your breath for a ride. Seeing temp field at aid station with temporary field aid stations with about 15 people all lying around and docs splashing little water in them. Yes, some of us ordered to go back and get gear, mostly ammo or weapons, like a bloop or a grenade launcher from our heat cases. It's not like we just parted. Bill Braniff, that's okay. Oh, not we like we no excuses that way. Okay. Next one. Bill Braniff says scout dogs also suffered a heat stroke and had to be medevaced for help. Depending on the area where they were, what they did while in Vietnam, and on their metabolism. just like the people. Jim Baker says, 68, 69. What did soldiers aside from injuries suffer from the Vietnam War? Let's see, in no particular order. And off the top of my head, sunburn, blisters, sores, cuts, scratches, infections, burns, malaria, ingrown toenails, jungle rot, thirst, heat, rain, cold, constipation, hemorrhoids, diarrhea, heat stroke, hearing issues, fear, loneliness, harassment, disrespect. It will be easier, perhaps, to list what they didn't suffer from. The non-combat related risks to deployment forces include an array of different threats to health, infectious diseases, non-battle related injuries, injuries from heat and cold exposure, and psychological stress have been large contributors to casualties in war after war. Chemical and biological weapons are increasingly seen as threats to deployed forces, as are environmental and contaminants and toxic industrial chemicals. In the Vietnam War, infectious diseases took a heavy toll of the U.S. military population. Diseases were listed as the cause of 56 to 74% of active duty Army patient admissions to the hospital in Vietnam from 1965 to 1970. Now, let me read that to you again. In the Vietnam War, infectious disease took a heavy toll on the U.S. military population. Disease was listed as the cause of 56 to 74% of active duty Army patients' admissions to hospital in Vietnam from 1965 to 1970. That's a lot of people who didn't get shot but ended up having the hospital. Until 1967, the total number of lost days of duty by active duty Army personnel initially admitted for medical care from non-combat injuries outpaced those from battle injury. From 1968 to 1960, non-battle injuries contributed to nearly half of the lost days of duty. The experiences of Vietnam veterans brought the first widespread recognition of delayed or chronic PTSD in deployed forces. People diagnosed with PTSD are characterized by symptoms of increased arousal, sudden relieving of a traumatic event, through recurring and intrusive recollection of dreams, and avoidance of stimuli associated with trauma, American Psychological Association says. The National Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Study was a comprehensive national study of the post-war psychological problems of Vietnam veterans, mandated by Congress in 1990. 65% of the veterans committing suicide are over 50 years old. Now, that drops back to us Vietnam vets quite often. We came back, we couldn't talk about the war, we kept it inside us, we went out and got a job, took care of our family, and now we've gotten a little older, we've started to slow down, we've probably retired, most of us, and now it's time for all those intrusive things to come back in your mind, the nightmares that you've pushed away for 50 years. The study indicated that 15.2% of all male Vietnam theater veterans and 8.5% of female Vietnam theater veterans had current cases of post-traumatic stress. Among men and women with high levels of war zone exposure, current PTS was higher. 35.8% among men and 17.5% among women. An additional 11.1% of male and 7.8% of female veterans suffer from partial post-traumatic stress disorder. Symptoms that are of sufficient intensity or breadth to qualify as post-traumatic stress, but that may still warrant professional attention. Analysis of the lifetime prevalence of PTSD indicates that almost 1/3 of male and more than 1/4 of women Vietnam theater veterans had PTSD at some time during their lives. It's also the first time since the Korean War that a regiment-sized force of Americans engaged in enemy combat. Fighting began on August 17, 1965, and lasted for 7 days in its combined elements of the 3rd Marine Division, reinforced, engaged and defeated the 1st Viet Cong Regiment, which had massed to attack and overrun the U.S. Marine base at Chu Lai. At its conclusion, the Marines counted 688 enemy dead. The Marines themselves suffered 46 deaths and 204 wounded. The battle was fought in humid 112-degree plus heat, and many more casualties were a result of heat strokes. Debilitating plants. Troops in Vietnam were sometimes lifted right out of the troop carriers and other vehicles by low-hanging vines that seemed innocent at first, but as soon as they were touched, constricted around an unsuspecting driver, grabbing them by the arms or neck, they became known as the wait a minute vines. That's just the beginning. Vietnam's most beautiful trees and flowers are also its deadliest. Heartback grass, flame lilies, that's what's in the picture, twisted cord flowers, bark cloth trees are all powerful enough to kill a human or cause blindness upon contact or accidental ingestion, which is more common than one might think. In country. Remember the guy a while ago talking about the crotch rot and didn't wear underwear? That kind of gives you an idea of what the men and women faced. Well, most of it would be the people out in the jungles and so forth, out the combat grunts, so forth. But some of that was also by people in the back. Some of the people in the back went out on a regular basis too. They had food out, ammo out, all the things that needed. So even the people who sit back in the back quite often spent time in the jungle. Like I did, I spent most of my time back at Long Bend, but I also spent time out in the jungles. Our time is up. I look forward to seeing you next month. Let's see, next month would be, our show next month will be May 9th. May 9th, we'll be seeing you again in May 9th. Hope you have a great week. And sometime you might want to close your eyes and think about that ambush again, just kind of get your thought in the right way. Thank you very much for tuning in, and y'all have a good remainder of the day.
You are tuned to the Nissan Communications Network. If you tuned in too late, you can always watch each program in its entirety or download an MP3 audio file of it in the archives section at nissancommunications.com. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter, and like us on Facebook. Sponsored by StreamingGear.com, Carolina Apparel, and DeltaForce.net.